Hello everybody, it's the music reviewer, and today we're going to do another episode of ranked best to worst. Today we're ranking Panic at the Disco's discography. Like I said before, same ground rules, has to be a studio album, and means no live albums, no cover albums, no B-sides, nothing like that, just straight up studio albums. So without further ado, let's get into it. Coming in at last was honestly a very tough pick because I quite frankly like all of Panic at the Disco's albums, and none of them, much like other bands I can talk about, there are no albums from this album that are particularly bad. But the one that comes at last is Vices and Virtues. I cannot say that, sorry if I get that wrong. This is Panic at the Disco's, I believe, third album. And it's a really good album, actually. It's really good. It has stuff like Sarah Smiles, which is honestly, I'd say, one of my top 3 favorite Panic at the Disco songs. The only problem I have with it is the fact that during this time when Panic at the Disco was just starting to get popular, is also the exact same time that emo music and all that stuff that they were originally known for at the time started to die out. So Panic needed to start switching up their sound, and this is their first stab at actually switching things up a little bit. And I find it a little off and shaky at times, but it's not bad. I just find in this album they're still experimenting a lot and still trying to move around their sound a lot. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it could be better. But like I said, it's all about its experimentation, and you know what? I think it pays off, and you see in these later albums. Next up is A Fever You Can't Sweat Out. Like I said, this is Panic probably in their prime. This is their first album, and I think probably one of their angstiest and, in my opinion, immature. That's basically my main problem with most of Panic's earlier work. I found them to be quite a bit immature, a little bit overly immature, and sometimes edgy sounding. And like I said, they were part of the emo era, and that's what they were known for. But me, myself, I'm not a big fan of that kind of stuff. Not saying this is bad. I mean, I wrote Sin's Not Tragedies and Build God Then We'll Talk. Really, really good songs. But most of the other stuff I find a little bit over angsty, just a little over dramatic and a little over emo and at times. But like I said, none of these albums are particularly bad. Just exactly the style they were going for here was a little off for my taste. Next up, everyone's probably gonna absolutely murder my guts for this, but Pretty Odd. I'm sorry, it was a really, really tough choice to put it here, but I think Pretty Odd has the same problems that A Fever You Can't Sweat Out. It's a little bit more mature than The Fever You Can't Sweat Out, but it's still in that era where they were, still maturing, and, they were just embracing as much immaturity and emo and, the stuff that was popular at the time as much as they could. And, I don't blame them for taking that route, but looking back on it now, it wasn't exactly, I don't know. It wasn't exactly the most nicest sounding thing, per se. But it did have, like I said, some of my favorite stuff on there. 9 in the Afternoon, That Green Gentleman, really, really good stuff. I just find some of the work on Pretty Odd hasn't aged that well, a lot of the songs on there, and just kind of makes old Panic look kind of different compared to the new stuff they've been bringing out. Next up, coming at the second spot, is Too Weird to Live, Too Rare to Die. Now, what I really like about this album that separates it a lot from some of Panic's older work, if you've noticed, I put most of Panic's older stuff back a little bit, and I'll explain that when I get to the number 1 spot. But what I really liked about this album is the fact that like, I believe, like, this is the album that came after Vices and Virtues. Sorry, I can't say that right. And I feel like they're, like, on this album, they've matured a lot more than they have on A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, Pretty Odd, and all those albums before. And they're still experimenting with their music a little bit, but I feel like at this point in their career, Panic has generally gotten the idea of what a mature audience would really want out of a band like this. Well, at the time, there was only like 2 members, if I'm not mistaken. But like I said, this is probably has the biggest amount of songs that I like from Panic. Miss Jackson, This Is Gospel, Girls, Girls, Boys, and the heart-wrenching song, Nicotine. Really emotional. But yeah, number 1. Now at number 1 is Death of a Bachelor. Now hold on, before you freak out on me, let me explain myself. I know it's a cop-out choice, but let me explain. After, 4 long albums of, experimentation and just them trying to find their sound, I believe this album represents what Panic at the Disco should be and what they always should have been. I'm sure from like the early to mid 2000s, Panic was like this emo band, but that time has passed now. As of right now, I believe Death of a Bachelor perfectly shows what Panic should be, and I hope they really continue this onto their next album. And I know there could always be like a switch in, people's music taste over time, but as of right now in the moment, this is Panic at its finest, and I believe, at its most mature, because, like I said, the big problem I've had with a lot of Panic's earlier work, I usually find it, so cringy where I'm like, okay, this is kind of, and I just skipped, like, some of the tracks. I could sit through every single track on this album, except maybe, like Impossible Year, but I could sit through every single track on this album and honestly not be underwhelmed. Like, literally every single song on this album amazes me. Victorious, Hallelujah, Death of a Bachelor, Emperor's New Clothes, Don't Threaten Me with a Good Time, Crazy Equals Genius, Golden Days. Okay, everything. They're just wonderful, wonderful tracks, and I think it's mature. I much prefer this new mature Panic at the Disco rather than the stuff we got from early to mid 2000s. This is Panic finally finding their sound. Well, more like his sound, because it's only Brendan Urie now. But maybe all those other band members leaving was probably for the best. I mean, without that, we probably wouldn't have this lovely solo album from Brendan Urie. I feel like, Brendan has, finally matured after all these years of, being in the glory days of the emo phase of the 2000s. This is their sound, and this, I think they should always stick to this curriculum. Don't agree with me? Well, you know what? You should subscribe, and if you like this video, you should subscribe. If you like Panic at the Disco, you should subscribe. If you hate them, you should subscribe. You guys are the best. Bye-bye.